All right, good afternoon, everyone. That's quite an echo. You guys hear me okay? Is that all right? Excellent, great. Well, welcome to the first ever Darwin Day event here in Manteca. Let's have a big round of applause for all the people who helped out and made this happen today. And I want to thank all of you for coming out here to what is, in some ways, a historical event. I'm really thrilled that we're able to do this in Manteca and bring together the Stockton area atheists and freethinkers and the Stanislaus Humanists for what I hope will be an annual tradition. I don't know if you know this or not, but Darwin Day did not start here in Manteca. It's actually a long-running tradition. It's actually an international thing. There are Darwin Days happening all throughout the planet, not just today, but tomorrow in Sacramento and next weekend and during the week, all throughout. And so, as an example, if you love what you heard today and you happen to have tomorrow afternoon free, go up to Sacramento and enjoy their Darwin Day with a completely different set of speakers. But if we can make this work today, if financially this works out, if you guys are thrilled with what we put together, then I have every intention of repeating this every single year to celebrate Charles Darwin's birthday and his contributions to science. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. There is a plethora of drinks over there at the little cooler down there, and there's cookies and candy, and soon there will be cake. There is cake, we'll have that after. If anyone needs to use the restrooms, they are located over here in the lobby. If the doors are locked, Nathan over here, raise your hand, Nathan, has got the keys. So befriend him and he will let you into the restrooms. Speaking of Nathan, a round of applause for Nathan, who's recording not just today, but all of these colloquiums that we've had in the past. And you guys can find today's program as well as a number of our previous ones on YouTube if you just go to YouTube and do a search for Stanislaus Humanists. Please do check those out. I want to thank all of our speakers who are here today. There's Ryan Bell, who's running around somewhere. There he is in the back. And Glenn Branch from NCSC is over here. And Jerry DeWitt is right in the back as well. So thank you guys for coming as far as Louisiana and Oakland and Los Angeles today to make today a success. I also want to thank the City of Manteca and the Manteca Public Library for letting us use this facility and what would have been letting us use the facility right outside the pavilion. It was beautiful when we walked out there to start setting up. By the time we were done setting up today, it started to rain. I looked online and it said there's a chance of thunderstorms. And so I don't know if it's going to do that or not. It looks pretty beautiful right now, but you'll thank me later if it does start to pour. And if not, well, at least we reserved both in anticipation. Someone said, well, maybe that's a sign. And I say, yeah, it's a sign that we have weather. That's about all there is a sign of. Maybe a sign of climate change, perhaps. Glenn will tell us about that. Not here right now, but I want to thank Dave Ewart, who's always been helping us out, set up a bunch of chairs and signs and had to leave. I want to thank Andy, wherever he is over here, by the sound for setting up our sound system, and Carly for running around and getting groceries and helping us set up last minute as well, and to everyone else who put up chairs and that kind of stuff. And then organizations, we've got two organizations that are here today. I'm running the Camp Quest table, and if you aren't familiar with Camp Quest, the 10-second speech is that it's a summer camp for children ages 8 to 17 for a week in July up in Nevada City and down in Southern California. And if you've got kids, or if you act like a kid, we want to hear from you, because we're looking for counselors, we're looking for campers, there's financial aid available, and we're also looking for donations too. And Camp Quest offers a great program, a mix of their all-American outdoor camp, as well as about 2 hours a day of science and free thought, critical thinking, and leadership skills. And so there's more information about that right over there. And then we also have with us NCSC, the National Center for Science Education, and Glenn Branch, we'll hear from a little bit later. NCSC is taking the forefront in terms of making sure that evolution and climate change are taught appropriately in our school system, and we thank them very much for doing their work with that. And you can definitely check out their table. We'll have a couple breaks today. They've got a sign-up sheet for some literature. They've got handouts and all kinds of great stuff and some books there as well. You have books for sale too? Not today. But we're here to celebrate and talk about Charles Darwin, who undoubtedly has made one of the greatest contributions to our modern understanding of life as it is on this planet. Not the origination of life. We don't want to confuse the theory of evolution with the theory of abiogenesis. But from that point on, when that first gathering of cells has come together to form DNA and has then progressed on to the life that we understand on this planet and whatever future forms of life that may take. Charles Darwin has given us the foundation for that. He and his colleagues have put together in a very brave way what we now understand is the evolution of life and all of that stuff put together. This event is celebrated worldwide in an attempt to bring together not just us here in the Central Valley in California and the nation, but everybody together as International Darwin Day, and it's spearheaded by the American Humanists Association. So I want to thank them as well for having the forethought to put this together and to do this year after year after year and make this what should be a really great event. Charles Darwin said famously that there is grandeur in this view of life, and I cannot disagree with that. I cannot agree more, because no matter what we think about life and how we got here, the idea that we are all connected by a common element that is DNA and the evolution to get to that point that we are today. The thought that we are, you and I and the plants and animals, other animals that are out there, that we're all connected to each other, I think is really special. No matter what you feel religiously, spiritually, the idea that science has shown us that we are all connected, I think is beautiful. And you can even take that a step further and say that, all the planets and stars and all that, and Carl Sagan's and Roman star stuff, that, I think, it gives me kind of a spiritual feeling, if you will, that we are really all part of something together here. So with that, I am really thrilled to introduce our first of three speakers today. Ryan Bell comes to us from Southern California, from Hollywood, Los Angeles area, and he was a former Seventh-day Adventist. And I know we have another former Seventh-day Adventist here in the audience, and maybe others that I'm not even sure of. But he earned recent fame by announcing almost a year and 3 weeks ago, that he's going to try on a year without God. And he blogged extensively about that. I encourage you to check out that blog. And having run 52 weeks, just allowing himself to think, what if there isn't a God? What if I'm wrong or was wrong about the way that I understood life to be? He is then, he's no longer a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. So he's going to tell us a little bit about that. And after he's done, when you go home tonight, I do encourage you to check out his blog. And also, he's got a book coming out and a movie, a film coming out as well. And so you can check those out too. Maybe we'll have him back a year from now or 6 months from now when all that's done to tell us a little bit more. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Bell.
I'm so humbled to be here for a Darwin Day event. I know next to nothing about Darwin because I was raised in the church and in Christian schools, and Darwin was a name that was just universally associated with bad stuff. It was the fast track out of faith and religion. So I think what David has done here today is organize this day in order from people who know the least about Darwin down to the people who know the most about Darwin at the end of the day. So I hope you'll stick around through all of this. I know I'm going to
The library
look
will
forward
close
to
in 30
that.
minutes. If you need assistance,
That is a trippy echo that's going on behind me.
The library
I'm
will
having a hard
close in 3
time.
minutes. The
We'll wait for
information desk
her.
will close in 15 minutes.
Don't worry, that doesn't apply to us.
Phone's off the hook. Okay. So the only thing I know really about evolution at this, without I'm overstating that, but is the evolution of my own story. So that's the only kind of evolution I'm going to talk about today, is my evolution, which has happened over the course of my life. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun corresponding with David and Nathan over the course of the past year, just getting to know people in the secular and free thought community. It's been just really a pleasure learning from all of you, and to spend this time with you now is a real treat. I actually grew up in this area. I went to high school in Mariposa. And my grandmother now lives in the Sonora area in Jamestown. So I came up last night with my daughter Zoe, who's here, and my girlfriend Rebecca. And we spent last night in Sonora, and we'll spend tonight in Sonora before we head back. So it was a great, beautiful drive over here this morning. It's always nice to be back in the Central Valley. I want to start just telling you a few little stories about how I went on this journey. And I think what's been interesting for me is that as I've looked at this story of my own experience, I've realized that it's a journey that has many beginnings. So I think for most of you that have heard about my story, for you it started in January of 2014. Of course, for me it didn't start in January 2014. It's been going for years and years. And part of what I've tried to do this past year is figure out, where did it start? Where did my coming to terms with what I now feel is not true about the religion I was raised with, where did that doubt begin? And one of the events that I point to, I mean, most of those important things are sort of lost to my memory, like I'll never remember them again. But one of the moments that sticks out in my mind was a time when I was a pastor in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And I was in Bucks County for 5 years in a really cool church in a really nice neighborhood. And we were doing good things in the community as far as I could tell. And but I was struggling with my own relationship to the wider Christian community. As I don't know how many of you know anything about Seventh-day Adventists, but we don't play well with others in general. Like, we kind of keep to ourselves. We're often mistaken for Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. There's actually nothing much in common between them, although we're sort of secluded and exclusive in the same sort of way. So if you're a Mormon, you're not supposed to date someone in high school, you know, that's not also Mormon. We had that kind of same thing as well. Although my first girlfriend in high school was a Mormon. Anyway, I digress. So I was struggling because I really wanted to be engaged with the wider ecumenical relationship in the community, all these other churches and pastors. And I had called just out of the phone book. Remember those books that had yellow pages and all of that? So I just went through there and started calling people and tried to connect with pastors in the neighboring churches, and nobody would call me back. And I just thought, well, I mean, I was calling sort of the conservative churches, and I thought, well, I'm probably too weird for them because we're like Seventh-day Adventists, and we're not really Christians for them, maybe. So then I said, well, let me just call those bad liberals. And so I called the Episcopalians and the Lutherans, and they called me right back. And in some cases, they even answered the phone. They had someone like in the building answering phones. So I eventually got to know them, and that was a real turning point for me when I relativized my own understanding of my faith. And I thought, the Seventh-day Adventists aren't the only ones that have something to say to the world. But, you know, maybe the Episcopalians have something to say too. So shortly after that, I don't remember what the context was, but it was a really hot, muggy summer day in suburban Philadelphia, and I was driving through my town, and a lot of the churches have these movable lettering signs. You've seen them. And shortly after this, I started warning pastors just to burn their movable lettering sign. It's just too dangerous to have, you know, somebody in charge of that. And so I was driving that day, and the sign I remember on this little church said, "You think it's hot out here, ... And I thought, well, that's not a very nice thing to say. and then my next thought was, I wonder if they really think that somebody's going to drive by, see that sign, and think to themselves, we ought to go to that church this Sunday. Right? That would be a good thing to do. Like, let's go there because they think if we don't, we're going to go to hell. Like, that's a real winsome thing. And I thought, man, I would not easily become a Christian if I wasn't one already. It was one of those thoughts that just snuck into my mind unbidden, there was no forethought about it. It just sort of snapped into my mind. I wouldn't be a Christian if I wouldn't easily become a Christian if I wasn't one already. I would drive by that sign and I would think, well, those people are stupid. Like, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And that kind of made me step back a little bit and say, well, then why am I? And of course I said, well, I want to be a different kind of Christian. I want to represent something different in the world. I don't want to be that way. Shortly after that, the events of 9/11 unfolded and everybody changed their movable lettering signs to God Bless America. And I had a movable lettering sign at my church too, and I had a guy that was in charge of it, and I always made him run the stuff by me because I didn't want to be a part of that. And I said, whatever you do, don't put God Bless America on the sign. You would be better to say, God bless the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, let's, if you want to put something, put that. Because that's at least transparently, like, tribal and all of that. And so instead we put something like, God bless the nations or something, it was a little bit more inclusive. And I realized in that moment that around 9/11 and all of the aftermath of that and what it meant to be in Philly at that time, sort of between these three epicenters of the 9/11 attacks. I was actually on my way to visit a friend in Manhattan when the planes hit the buildings and we turned around on the New Jersey Turnpike and went back home, and they collapsed as we were driving back. So it had a big effect on me. The daughter that's with me today was an infant in a car seat, so it was like it was a big moment. For us. And I remember thinking that these men who flew these planes into buildings are either crass and politically motivated, or they're real believers, or some combination of the two. And in as much as they might be real believers, they're really no different than the men who carried out genocide in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, and thought that God was telling them to do that as well. And little by little, these things began to unravel for me. Shortly after that, I had a new member join my church who came from a fairly well-known Adventist church in Ohio, and was kind of a prominent member of that church. And so I was super excited. He was a good leader. He had money, which was nice. And he had two sons. And we saw one son, but we never saw the other son. And eventually we were at his house for a movie and drinks or whatever some night. And his other son came out, and I said, oh, really nice to meet you. And over time I realized, after inviting him to church over and over again, that he was gay. And this is why he had not come to church. And he had been told by his last church that he wasn't welcome, or in some form or fashion, and I said, well, you should come. Like, you're an outstanding pianist, and we would love to have you play music and whatever. And he didn't for a long time, and then eventually he did. And he was my first gay friend, if I can put it that way. Like, I don't ever remember having homophobic thoughts or I really don't. I just remember just not thinking about the topic at all. Like, it just wasn't in my life at all. It wasn't something that I dealt with. And then when I met him, my worldview began to shift. And I thought, well, why would we segment our population like that? Why wouldn't he be welcome? And then, of course, there are these Bible verses and all the rest. And I had a decision to make in those moments. I had to decide whether I was going to prioritize people or a text, an ancient text. And what I did, I think, was try to prioritize people, but I spent the next 15 years trying to make the two things fit. Trying to reinterpret the Bible in such a way that my value and love for people fit within it, right? That it all fit together. And so when I ended up in Hollywood in 2005, and I was a pastor there at an Adventist church for about 8 years, we had created a community there that was completely inclusive, that was sort of on the cutting edge of social issues, of a variety of types of social issues. We were involved in community organizing around the banking crisis in 2008. We resisted Prop 8 when that came around in 2008. And all of these things were like chinks in the armor for me, where I thought I was going to lose my job at a variety of these turns. And eventually, in 2013, in March, I was in the office of my conference president. And I love to say this next thing.
In the library,
The Adventist church is structured a little bit like the Catholic church. And if you know anything about the Adventists, you know how ironic that is, because the Adventists spend quite a bit of time criticizing Catholics. But it's Catholic in the sense that the hierarchy hires the pastors and then dispatches them to churches. So you have a relational accountability to your members, but you have a fiduciary accountability to the denomination. So I was always torn between these things. And the conference was always calling me in about every 4 to 6 months to account for myself, to say, are you genuinely a Seventh-day Adventist? Are you really fulfilling the duties that you've been called to fill? And I, of course, said, absolutely. You know, the Adventist pioneers were these men and women in the 1820s and 1830s who weren't content with the truth that they had been given. They were pursuing new truth, and as they did that, whether they were right or wrong, they were expelled from their local churches for not towing the party line of whatever church they belonged to. So for me, the impulse or the pioneering spirit of these Adventist pioneers was to never be content with the truth that you've been given, but to continually seek to learn new things and to pursue new truth. And so I said in my own defense, there's nothing more Adventist than that. So in that sense, yes, I'm an Adventist. Now, I also believe that the earth is not 6,000 years old, and I think gay, lesbian, and transgender people are equally wonderful people and are entitled to all the privileges and rights that any other citizen of our country is entitled to, and all the rest. And that was not going to work out. So we finally came to this point where he said to me these words, Ryan, don't you think you've outgrown the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And I stopped because a lot of stuff was going through my head at that moment, and I was trying to sort through it real quick and not say something that I'd regret. Although at that point I was saying all kinds of regrettable things. I decided that I was not going to have any more regrets. So I said, yes, I think that's possibly true. But are you okay with that? Like, are you comfortable with that? As the leader of the Adventist church in this region, is Adventism something that you outgrow? And it seemed that he had this tacit assumption that it was outgrowable, right? And I want to keep growing, and so I suppose it's inevitable that I would eventually outgrow almost anything, right? So I said to him, maybe, I think, all of our institutions need to be growing with us, right? Like, we are growing, and institutions ought to grow too, or they should be discarded. And so it was just a weird moment for me, because I realized that I had outgrown it. And within a day or two of that time, we agreed that I was no longer fit to be an Adventist pastor, and we parted ways. And that was huge for me, because I had committed my whole life to this. I was a reformer. I was not going to be like anybody else. I was going to change this thing and make it hospitable and welcoming and wonderful and a blessing to the world. Like, I wanted my religion to be a healing, beautiful influence in the world. And I believed that was possible. And to a degree, I think that somebody else now perhaps can do that. Like, maybe that is possible for someone, but it's not possible for me anymore. I gave it my best. I gave it the old college try, for like 20 years, and it didn't really pan out for me. So I hope that other people can do that, because in part I'm a pragmatist. I think that religion isn't going to go anywhere in the near future, and so in as much as it's going to be with us, I think that we need people who are making faith and religion something that's more compatible with our secular society. And so in as much as people can make those things connect, I think it makes for a more peaceful and hospitable environment. I think the things that I talked a little bit about choosing people over ideology and over doctrine. And for me, there's a fundamental difference here between liberals and conservatives of any type. conservatives, by their nature are conserving things. And I think we need conservatives because there's things worth conserving, right? There are things worth preserving and holding on to. But when it comes to religion, conservatives are about preserving traditions and preserving things and making sure nothing changes. Liberals, I think, on the other hand, are the people who start not with the established principles or the established rules, but start with the people and the experiences and life itself. And I feel like if you're open and learning and constantly engaging with people in the world around you, that life wins. It's sort of like the weeds that grow through the cracks in the sidewalk. You can lay down as much concrete as you want, but eventually those blades of grass are going to come through. And I feel like part of my deconversion is this sense that life wins, that the value of people and the value of equality and the value of community is the thing that broke through a lot of sort of the crust that had formed over parts of my life. And so I think choosing people, beginning with people, was a big thing for me. And as I mentioned before, seeking truth. It's very ironic, I think, that Christians or people of faith of any kind who ostensibly are seekers of truth, right? People that really get involved in their religion, you do so because they want to pursue truth. They want to pursue answers to life's big questions. What's so ironic about this is that in that pursuit of truth, they cut off many times the very thing that can lead them to a deeper understanding of what's true. And that tension, I think, creates a lot of the problems for people that truly are seekers of truth. And so for me, ironically, my passion for figuring things out and wanting to know things led me away from my faith. I remember saying to Rebecca not too long ago, I want to know everything. And she said, about what? And I said, about everything. I just want to know everything about my worst. People ask me, are you afraid of dying now that you're not a Christian anymore? I said, the only thing that bums me out about dying, well, a couple of things. But one of them is not being around to learn everything, not being around to see what happens next. I want to know what's going to happen next. Well, what are we going to discover next? What are we going to learn? And I'm going to have to leave that to my kids and their kids and other people. But that relentless pursuit of knowledge and understanding, for me, is what is sort of like my guiding star in a way, kind of that true north. I think if I'm orienting myself towards that, that's what's important to me. And that was what my year without God was about. I really was at the cusp of not believing in God. I'd come down to the bottom of it, and I'd left my faith. I had parted ways with the church. I had come to the point where I was like, all these questions that have been in the back of my mind about the truth of the Bible, the trustworthiness of the Bible, whether it comports with reality, even sometimes, certainly not always, but even maybe sometimes. Maybe I haven't found the right hermeneutical key, to unlock it. And then all the way down to is there actually a God after all? I was telling someone in a podcast recently that it reminded me of a time when, as a child, I dropped a stone in this well, and I assumed there was water down there, because that's what's in wells, right? Water. And so I dropped this stone in this well, and there's that point at which you expect it to hit something, right? And then you don't hear it, and it's so dark you can't see anything. And then it goes down a little bit further, and you're thinking, any minute now, right? Any second now, it's going to hit the water, and it just keeps going and going much further than you think, and then eventually, it hits the bottom. And I felt in those early months of 2014, maybe church just isn't for me. Maybe that's kind of where I need to understand my next phase of my life. Because I've been a church guy my whole life. Maybe it's just the church thing that's wrong. And people, of course, June of my year without God, people are like, have you considered that maybe it's just religion that you have a problem with? And I said, yeah, it crossed my mind. I've been doing this and I was a weird kind of pastor too. I would, in the middle of my sermons, talk about the dangers of religion. In the middle of a sermon, at Easter, or something like that. I was just, because I'm awake. And I see the dangers of religion, even when I was a religious guy, right? I mean, you have to admit that religion is dangerous. So I thought, okay, maybe it's religion, or maybe it's my church, maybe it's Christianity, maybe it's religion in general that's the problem, you know, it creates these tribal hostilities. And then I thought, well, maybe it's just Christianity, or maybe it's religion, or maybe it's the fact that maybe there isn't a God. And maybe that's the bottom of the well. And so for me, the pebble went all the way to the bottom. It went all the way down, and right as I was beginning 2014, I thought, I don't have a congregation to be responsible for anymore. I don't have people to fire me if I say the wrong thing, or admit to the wrong thing, or ask the wrong question. I don't have people who are depending on me for their eternal salvation to guide them in the right way. It's just me now. In more ways than one, literally, it was just me. And I thought, well, there's no better time than now to really see how far down the well goes and what's down there. And so I started in 2014, January 1st, saying, I'm going to spend this year exploring that, plumbing the depths of it, trying to figure out where it stops. You know, does it go all the way down to solipsism? Like, does it go all the way down to, like, I'm not even sure I'm here? I think we all go there for a moment, right? We all go there. Maybe more often than we ought to. Okay, let's confess. But then I'm like, okay, I'm a practical guy. I'm a realist. So here I am, and here we are. Okay, so we got to deal with that. But that was sort of the emphasis for the year. That was my goal. And so I started reading things that I was previously told not to read. And I didn't just read them because I was told not to read them. I'm not a compliant guy like that. You can ask me, you can ask my girlfriend. I don't just do things because I'm told not to. I actually internalized that I wasn't supposed to, right? That these were bad things. Thomas Paine, for example, or Voltaire, or Nietzsche, or any of the classic people that Christians don't want their kids to read. And I started reading and talking to people, and I remember saying in that very first blog post in Huffington Post, I said, if there are gatherings of atheists, I would like to visit them and see what they do and what they eat, if they're really eating babies or not. Found out they eat cake and really yummy looking cookies over there. And so immediately people started contacting me, podcasters mostly. I mean, who knew there were so many podcasts, right? It's a strange new world. And so I've met a lot of really wonderful people. Many of you in this room have been a part of my journey, whether in person or online, and now in person, of course, if we haven't met before. People who have been through very similar experiences to my own, and people who are at various places along the journey. And so my goal now, people ask me, so do you want now everybody to be an atheist? And I say, no, I really don't care about that much. What I really care about is that people are critical thinkers, that people use their rational faculties, trust them, and use the tools that have been given to them, and that people are, that's really super distracting.
The library will be closing in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, everybody. That people are critical thinkers, and that they use their brains, and that they're not afraid to ask questions and pursue those questions to wherever they lead. And I think for all of us, there's the next question, right? The thing that we need to know next, the thing that we need to learn next. And whatever that is for the person that I'm talking to, I want them to ask that question. And I get a lot of emails and a lot of Facebook messages, more than I can talk to and answer, mostly from people who are like, but how do you go to sleep at night knowing that you're not going to see your loved ones in heaven one day? And are you afraid to die? And what about your moral compass? What do you do about that? And I know that you all have heard all of these things before, and you're sort of rolling your eyes probably, if not literally, then figuratively. But people actually have those questions, right? You probably had them at one point, some of you that were religious. And I I think for me, it's important to value those questions as if they're authentic and they're not just being asked to be a smart aleck or something. But people actually are very deeply concerned. And so I'm very interested in helping people just ask the next question in their journey. I'll close with this story about my daughter, which I got no permission to share beforehand. So we were driving up here yesterday, and she starts, or maybe you told me a couple days before, about the science project that she's doing. And she had to pick from a list of questions or statements. And then she had to do the project based on whether that statement is a myth or whether it's true, or whether it's partially true, or whatever. The goal is to explore the statement. And the one that, did you pick it or was it assigned to you? You kind of picked it? Yeah, so her statement is that people who are primarily artists and creatives use the right side of their brain more than the left. Right? It's a common thing that we say or think, we hear it, right, out there in the public. And she's supposed to figure out, is that a myth or is that true? And I thought, well, I've heard that too. I'm not a specialist in that area. It's a really good question. But what was even more important to me is I just love that she's doing that work, right? Being taught by her teachers and important people in her life that you don't just accept a statement because it sounds right, or that sort of makes a kind of sense, but that there are actually people who spent their entire lives learning and studying those things, and we can learn from them. And so for her to answer that question, to me, is the precursor for her to answer almost any question that she could encounter. And we may not have a definitive answer for every question, every time we ask it, or every time we go to answer it, but that tool is saying, now, is this true, or is this something someone just told me? And I think that I didn't get that in my childhood. There was an element of it because we were outliers in the Christian community, and the rest of y'all Christians were going to hell. So we had to ask critical questions about your faith so that we could make sure that we had ours right. But beyond the boundaries of our group, we weren't asking critical questions, right? We weren't talking about Darwin. We weren't asking about where this all came from and how long it took to get here and all of that. We had answers for those things already. And now all we had to do was figure out how the data fits into our answer. And which is, a lot of the way that I was raised. And so, anyway, that's my objective, and in the years going forward, I really hope that, and I think, like Jerry, what I know from your experience too, you almost go on being a pastor in many ways, just to a different group of people with a different objective, and sort of come home to where you started, only different. So, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. We're going to take a 10-minute break, but before, I just want to remind everybody that Ryan is producing a documentary and a book, and please check out the websites for that, A Year Without God.
Yeah, it's the Year Without God Film, yearwithoutgodfilm.com, and my blog is yearwithoutgod.com. We're doing an Indiegogo right now for the film, so if you have a few extra shekels you want to help us, that'd be great.
Definitely support that Indiegogo campaign. And so during our 10-minute break, we can use the restroom.